A werewolf romance story by the Alpha's Claim Collection. Prologue. The Wedding Hall of Velthorn. Gold and black banners hung from the rafters of Velthorn's great hall, draped so thick they swallowed the torchlight. They were the colors of the Iron Fang Alliance, chosen by Alpha Dorian, not by the pack whose walls they decorated. Not by the woman whose marriage they celebrated. No one had asked her opinion on the colors. No one had asked her opinion on anything. Dorian stood at the head of the hall, goblet raised, voice carrying the warm, rolling confidence of a man who had never once lost what he reached for. Around him sat every alpha, every beta, every elder of consequence from the 5 northern territories. He had gathered them deliberately. Witnesses were not incidental to men like Dorian. Witnesses were the point. 3 years of careful work, he said, his smile easy as warm water. 3 years of building something the Northern Territories have never seen, a unified alliance, bound by blood and vow, strong enough to weather any storm. He let the pause breathe. Measured. Perfect. Tonight, we celebrate the foundation stone of that alliance. The union of Iron Fang and Velthorn. A bond that will hold for generations. Goblets rose across the hall. The great doors did not open. They were opened slowly, deliberately, by the 2 guards posted outside them. As though whoever stood on the other side had simply looked at the wood, and the wood had understood. A hush fell over the crowd. Heavy as a funeral shroud. She stood in the entrance, and she did not look like a political bride. She looked like a storm that had learned to dress itself in silk. Her gown was deep crimson, and it moved around her like a living thing, like it had chosen her rather than been chosen. Her silver hair fell loose past her shoulders. Unbound, untamed, every inch of it a declaration. The ancient moon pendant at her throat caught the torchlight and held it. And at the base of her collarbone, visible above the gown's neckline, a mark glowed against her skin. Not the brand of a political arrangement. The sacred mark of a true mate. Given freely. Received willingly. Beside her stood Alpha Caspian of Velthorn, and the room felt it the moment he entered, the way a room feels a change in weather. Tall. Still. His dark silver eyes moved across the assembled crowd once, cataloging without expression, and settled on Dorian with the particular calm of a man who had been waiting a long time for exactly this moment. His hand rested at the small of her back. Not because protocol required it. Because he would not let her stand before these wolves alone. Dorian's goblet did not slip from his fingers. He set it down. Very carefully. The deliberateness of it was somehow worse. Selene walked forward into the silence, and every step she took on that stone floor sounded like a verdict. I was delivered to Velthorn as a political bride, she said. Her voice was quiet. It did not need to be anything else. The hall had gone so still that a whisper would have carried to the rafters. I was sold by my father. Packaged by you. Her eyes found Dorian's across the length of the room and did not move from them. You both believed that a woman with no pack, no rank, and no options had no recourse. She stopped. You were wrong about the options. Somewhere in the crowd, a beta leaned to whisper to his alpha. Neither of them looked away from her. Caspian said nothing. He did not need to. His presence behind her left shoulder was its own statement, a mountain deciding where it stood. Your second mistake, Selene continued, was believing I would stay silent about what you did to my mother. The hall erupted. She let it. And above the fortress, the moon hung full and silver in the winter sky, watching the way she always watched, not with mercy, not with intervention, but with the patient certainty of something that has known all along how the story ends. 6 months earlier. Before the story begins, I want to know, where are you in the world right now? Comment below with your city and the time. Dawn breaking in Singapore? Afternoon sun in Johannesburg? Twilight falling over Rome? The deep night hours in Chicago? I'm fascinated by how our werewolf-loving community connects from every time zone. This is the story of Selene, a woman traded like property to silence a truth, who arrived at a mountain fortress carrying a locket, a secret and a destiny she never asked for. If you're here for powerful mate bonds, corrupt alphas brought to justice, ancient conspiracies, and a heroine who burned down the empire that tried to bury her, show your love by hitting that like button and subscribing for more stories like this one. Be part of our global pack. Tell me where you're listening from in the comments. Now let's begin. Chapter 1. The night she was sold. Selene knew something was wrong 3 days before she was told. It lived in the small things first. The way the household staff stopped meeting her eyes in the corridors. The way the evening meals grew quieter, her father's beta excusing himself early, twice, then 3 times, claiming border business that left no tracks in the logs she had access to. The way her father looked at her. Not with the tired irritation she had grown up cataloging, but with something else. Something adjacent to guilt. She had learned a long time ago not to ask her father direct questions. Direct questions produced evasions wrapped in authority, and authority in Garen's house sounded like a door closing. So she watched instead. She had always been better at watching. On the 3rd morning, she rose before dawn and sat at the window of her room, looking out at the Iron Fong flags that had appeared on the outer gate 2 nights ago without announcement or explanation. Iron Fong, the most aggressive expansion pack in the Northern Territories. In 3 years, Alpha Dorian had absorbed 4 smaller packs and neutralized 2 more through political arrangement. He was not cruel, by all accounts. Cruelty was inefficient, and Dorian ran on efficiency. He was simply inevitable, the way a tide was inevitable, not malicious, just unstoppable and utterly indifferent to what it covered. Her wolf stirred beneath her skin. A restless, uncertain press, like an animal pacing a cage it had only recently discovered. Something is happening, her wolf said, in the way wolves communicated, not in words, but in weight, in the pressing urgency of instinct against bone. Selene pressed her palm flat against the cold glass of the window. She knew. She simply did not know yet what shape the knowing would take. Her father summoned her at midday. The study smelled of old leather and the particular pine resin her father burned when he wanted to project solemnity. It was a calculated smell she had long since understood. Her father was a man who managed every impression within his reach. He stood behind his desk. Beside him, in the 2 chairs that were never offered to Selene, sat 2 men she did not recognize. She recognized the one on the left within a breath. Alpha Dorian of Iron Fong was younger than she had imagined. Mid-30s, perhaps, with the kind of face that photographs well and reveals nothing, clean angles, easy warmth in his expression, the sort of handsomeness that worked very hard to appear effortless. He wore no rank markers. He did not need to. The way every other body in the room oriented slightly toward him, even in stillness, made his position self-evident. The man to his right was his beta. Older. Watchful. His eyes had been on Selene since the moment she entered, moving over her the way an appraiser moved over an estate, cataloging value. She did not let her expression change. Her father cleared his throat. Selene. Come in. She came in. She did not sit. No chair had been offered. I'll be direct, Garen said, which meant he would not be. He never was. Directness in her father's vocabulary meant I have already decided, and I am now performing the courtesy of informing you. An arrangement has been reached. One that secures this pack's position for the next generation and beyond. Selene's eyes moved to Dorian. Dorian smiled. It reached his eyes. That was the worst part. It genuinely reached his eyes, warm and open, as though he were delivering good news to someone he cared about. Your father speaks very highly of you, he said. His voice was the same as his face, pleasant, deliberate, engineered for trust. I've heard a great deal about your gifts. Your knowledge of pack medicine. Your steadiness under pressure. A small pause. Just long enough. Velthorn's alpha is in need of a consort. Someone capable. Someone who understands the weight of political alliance. The word consort landed in the room and sat there. Not mate. Not even wife, with its implication of choice. Consort. The word for a woman placed somewhere useful. Selene looked at her father. He was looking at a point slightly above her left shoulder. You've already signed, she said. Not a question. Her father's jaw tightened. The arrangement is in the pack's best interest. Have you met Velthorn's alpha? She asked. The details are. Have you met him? Silence. Garen set a document on the desk between them without answering. She could see her father's signature at the bottom. She could see the iron fong seal pressed into the wax beneath it. She could see the date. 3 days ago. He had signed 3 days ago. The same morning the flags appeared on the gate. The same morning the staff stopped meeting her eyes. Does she have any spirit problems? Dorian asked her father pleasantly. The question was aimed at Garen, but his eyes had never left Selene. I only ask because Velthorn requires a certain composure. The pack can be challenging for those in use to a stronger alpha's authority. Spirit problems. As though she were a horse being assessed for temperament. As though she were not standing in the room. Her wolf rose sharply beneath her skin, sudden and hot, a flare of something that had been banked for months. Selene felt the heat of it climb her throat and forced it back down. Slowly. The way she had learned to. None, her father said. Selene looked at the document on the desk. At the signature she had not been asked to provide. At the seal that had already decided her future. She looked at Dorian. When? She asked. For days, Dorian said. I'll provide an escort. Not will you be ready. Not is that sufficient time. I'll provide an escort. Selene nodded once. She picked up the document, read it fully. Every clause, every condition, the full extent of what her father had traded her for, which was protection of rank, continued autonomy for the Ashbale pack, and the use of Iron Fong trade routes for a period of 20 years. 20 years. She set the document back down. May I go? She asked her father. He was still looking at the point above her left shoulder. Yes. She left without looking at Dorian again. She went to her mother's room that night. It was the last door at the end of the east corridor, and it was always locked, and Selene had long ago made a copy of the key from the impression she had pressed in soap when she was 11 years old. She had never told her father this. Some things were worth keeping. The room smelled of dust and dried rose and the faintest trace of cedar oil, the scent her mother had worn. It was the same scent Selene remembered from childhood, which meant her father had never opened the windows. Never let the room breathe out. Kept it sealed, preserved, the way a man preserved guilt. She sat on the edge of the bed. The quilt was undisturbed, smoothed flat and perfect, as though its owner had simply stepped out for a moment and would return shortly. Selene pressed her hand to it. The fabric was cold. Her mother, Lyra, had been dead for 8 years. The official record said illness. A wasting sickness that moved quietly through the body without warning. The healers had done what they could. No one had been at fault. Selene had been 15 when she died. Old enough to understand what a wasting sickness looked like. Old enough to understand that what she had watched in those final months did not look like one. But she had no proof. She had never had proof. Only the memory of her mother's face in the weeks before the end, not weak, not fading, but frightened. Frightened in the particular way of someone who knows the danger they are in and cannot name it to anyone who can help. And the single thing her mother had said to her, 3 days before she died, when the room had been empty and the words had come in a whisper so fragile Selene had thought she'd imagined them. Velthorn knows the truth. If something happens to me, find Velthorn. Find the records. Promise me. Selene had promised. She had been promising ever since. She sat in the cold room and let the silence settle around her. Then she said, to the empty air, to the undisturbed quilt, to whatever remained of the woman who had taught her how to press wolfroot for fever and how to read weather by the color of the eastern sky. I'm going. A pause. I'll find it. Whatever you hid there. Whatever they didn't want anyone to find. She smoothed a crease in the quilt that wasn't there. Her hands needed something to do. I know that's not why he's sending me. I know what I am to them. A seal on a document. A courtesy offering. Her voice did not crack. She had made a decision, some years ago, about what she would and would not allow to crack. But I'll make it mean something else. I promise. The cedar scent held in the still air around her. The moon pressed white light through the gap in the curtains, laying a single silver bar across the floor. Watching. She packed by candlelight. Not much. She had never owned much. Her father's household had not encouraged accumulation, the way men who feared losing things often discouraged others from having them. One leather satchel. A change of clothes. Her healer's kit, every compress and tincture and wrapped cutting of wolf root accounted for, packed with the precision of someone who understood that in unfamiliar territory, knowledge was the only currency that couldn't be confiscated. Her mother's locket. Small. Silver. The clasp worn smooth from the years Lyra had opened and closed it, the nervous habit of a woman who had carried something important and could not speak it aloud. Selene had worn it against her skin since the morning of the funeral. She tucked it beneath her collar now, felt the cool press of it against her sternum. She did not take the document with her father's signature. She had memorized it. Dawn found her in the courtyard with 2 guards she did not know. Dorian's men, placed without consultation, already positioned at her cart like a statement of ownership. The morning was gray and cold, the kind of cold that pressed in from all sides without source. Her father stood at the top of the steps. He was dressed. That was more than she had expected. They looked at each other across the distance of the courtyard, across the 8 years of a room he kept locked and a question he had never answered, across the 3 days of a decision he had made without her. He said, "Behave yourself." She said, "I'll try." Neither of them believed the other. She climbed into the cart. The wheels turned on the stone. The gates of Ashvale opened and then fell behind her, and she felt it, a clean, sudden severance, like a cord snapping. Her father's pack bond releasing her from its edges, the ambient hum of belonging going quiet in her chest all at once. Packless. She was packless now. No alpha's authority above her. No pack's voice beneath her. Nothing between her and the world but her own 2 hands and whatever she carried inside them. Her wolf did not howl. She pressed forward. That same restless, urgent press against Selene's ribs, not grief, not fear. Something more alive than either of those things. As though the severing had not diminished her but clarified her, stripped some weight from her she had not noticed carrying until it was gone. Forward, her wolf said. The cart moved north. The Ironfang escort did not speak to her. She did not speak to them. She watched the territory she had lived in all her life pass by the cart's open side. The familiar pale birch forests of Ashvale thinning and shifting, the trees growing darker and older as they crossed into neutral ground, the sky losing its familiarity the way skies did when you moved far enough from home. She thought about what she knew of Velthorn. In the northern territories, there were packs that ruled through noise, great declarations of power, public displays of dominance, the performance of strength for an audience. And then there was Velthorn. Velthorn did not perform. Velthorn's alpha had held his territory for 6 years, since inheriting it at the age of 26 following his father's death. In 6 years, he had refused 3 formal alliances, absorbed 2 border disputes without war, and declined every invitation to the Northern Summit, the annual gathering of pack leaders, without explanation or apology. His beta attended in his place and said nothing of consequence. No one knew why he had accepted this arrangement. No one knew much about Caspian of Velthorn at all. That had always struck her as either deeply suspicious or quietly remarkable. She had not yet decided which. The cart crested a ridge as the light began to fail, and Selene saw it. The fortress rose from the mountain like it had grown there, like the mountain had simply decided one day to take that shape, black stone, ancient and dense, its towers touching the low winter cloud. No flags on the outer walls. No banners, no declarations. Just the weight of the thing itself against the darkening sky, present the way bedrock was present, requiring nothing from the world to justify its existence. Her wolf went still. Then she did something she had not done in months. Not since before the grief. Not since before the locked room and the question without an answer and the long slow work of surviving her own anger. She surged. Forward, hard, urgent, not toward danger, not toward escape, but toward something else entirely. Something Selene did not have a name for. Something that lived in the direction of those black walls with the certainty of a compass needle finding north. Selene gripped the edge of the cart. Her knuckles went white. "What are you doing?" she asked her wolf. Her wolf did not answer in words. She answered in the oldest language, the language of the mate bond, of recognition, of the moon's particular and devastating sense of purpose. She answered in the feeling of coming home to a place you have never been. The fortress gates opened, and the cart moved forward, carrying Selene of Ashvale, packless, purposeful, the locket cold against her skin, into the beginning of everything. Chapter 2. The mate bond ignites. The gates of Velthorn opened without sound. That was the first thing Selene noticed. Iron gates that size, black, thick-barred, ancient in the way stone was ancient, should have groaned, should have announced themselves. Every fortress she had ever passed through had gates that spoke, that made the territory's authority audible. These simply parted, as though they recognized the cart, as though they had been waiting. She climbed down before the guards could assist her. A small thing, that not allowing herself to be handled, but she had learned that small things compounded. That the first moment you permitted someone to move you without your consent was rarely the last. The courtyard was full of wolves. Not chaotic, not aggressive. They stood along the edges of the yard in silence, watching, and the quality of their watching was different from anything Selene had experienced at Ashvale. Her father's pack watched strangers with suspicion dressed up as curiosity. These wolves watched with the still, patient assessment of animals that already knew the outcome and were simply waiting for events to confirm it. She stood in the center of the courtyard and looked back at them. Her healer's kit was slung over one shoulder, her satchel over the other. She had deliberately carried both herself, refusing to give them to the Iron Fang escort at the cart's departure that morning. Another small thing. Another compound. The pack studied her. She studied them back. Then the fortress doors opened, and the wolves in the courtyard shifted. Not in alarm. Not even in deference, exactly. It was subtler than either of those things, a slight, collective reorientation, the way a room full of people all turn their faces toward a window when the light changes. Involuntary. Instinctive. The body's acknowledgement of something the mind hadn't quite named yet. Selene felt it a breath before she understood it. A change in the air. A deepening of it. As though the courtyard had been a sketch, and someone had suddenly pressed down on the pen. He came down the fortress steps last. Alone. Unhurried. Alpha Caspian of Velthorn was not what Dorian's briefing had prepared her for. Dorian had described him in the language of threat, brutal, territorial, powerful enough to be worth appeasing. Those words had conjured something performative in Selene's imagination. Dominance worn on the outside. The kind of alpha who needed the room to know what he was before he'd crossed it. This man needed nothing. He was tall. Dark-haired, the kind of dark that absorbed light rather than reflecting it. His eyes, when they found her across the courtyard, and they found her immediately, without searching, as though she were the only fixed point in the yard, were a deep silver gray that caught the winter light like water over stone. He stopped at the base of the steps. The distance between them was perhaps 20 feet. And then the world restructured itself around a new axis. It arrived without warning. Without the slow build she might have anticipated, might have had some chance of bracing against. One moment she was standing in a strange courtyard holding her own bags, cataloging the details of an unfamiliar fortress. Her wolf pressed forward with that restless urgency she'd been carrying since the ridge. The next, she understood. Her wolf did not surge this time. She roared. The bond hit Selene like a wall of heat. Like stepping through a doorway from winter into summer with no threshold between them. It moved through her chest and down her spine and into her hands, and her hands were suddenly gripping her satchel strap so hard the leather creaked. And the only reason she was still standing was that her right hand had found the wheel of the cart beside her and locked around it. She gripped it, did not fall. Caspian had gone very still. He stood at the base of the steps with the absolute, controlled stillness of someone who had just been hit by exactly what she had been hit by and was using every resource he possessed not to show it. His jaw was tight. His eyes had not moved from her face. His beta, standing 2 steps behind him and to the right, inhaled sharply a short, audible breath that he immediately suppressed. The courtyard was silent. "You felt that," Caspian said. His voice was low, quiet. The kind of quiet that didn't need volume because the silence around it was already complete. It was not a question. He was not asking whether she had felt it. He was simply confirming, to himself or to her or to the listening universe, that it had happened. Selene straightened. She released the cartwheel, let go of the leather strap, settled both bags more deliberately on her shoulders, and met his silver eyes across the 20 feet of cold stone between them. "I don't know what you're talking about," she said. The courtyard remained silent for one more beat. Then his beta made a sound that was not quite a cough. Caspian looked at her for a moment longer, something moving in his expression, controlled before it could surface fully, and then he turned and spoke to the pack. Brief, quiet instructions. The yard began to move. Wolves dispersing toward their duties, or whatever passed for duties on the afternoon of a political bride's arrival. He did not look back at her immediately, but his beta did. The beta, older than Caspian, gray at the temples, with the kind of face that had seen a great many surprises and had learned not to show them, looked at Selene with an expression she could not fully read. Not hostility. Not pity. Something closer to calculation, and beneath that, very faint, something that might have been relief. The formal introduction ceremony took place in the great hall before sundown. The hall was older than anything Selene had stood in before. Velthorn stone was not the pale, cut stone of newer fortresses. It was ancient granite, black-veined and dense, the kind of stone that held cold even in summer. Iron sconces burned along the walls. The long table down the center was set for the Iron Fang delegation only. Velthorn wolves stood back and to the sides, witness to the proceedings rather than participants. She stood where she was placed, at the foot of the table, and she performed the presentation the way she had always performed things she did not consent to, with a precision that contained, beneath its surface, the absolute intention to be done with it as quickly as possible. Head lowered slightly, hands at her sides, voice measured. She said the required words, which were the traditional words of a wolf entering another alpha's territory by consent. They tasted like chalk. She had gotten through the first 3 lines when one of Dorian's men, the beta who'd escorted her, the one with the appraiser's eyes, stepped forward and took her arm. Not roughly, not violently, just took it to adjust her position, to angle her more precisely toward Dorian's empty seat at the table. The way you moved furniture. The hall went very quiet. Caspian's hand closed around the man's wrist. He had crossed the hall in the time it took Selene to register the grip on her arm, and she had not seen him move. One moment he was at the far end of the table. The next he was standing between her and the Iron Fang beta with his hand locked around the man's wrist, and his voice was the quietest thing in the room. No one touches what enters Velthorn's walls without Velthorn's invitation. He did not raise his voice. He did not need to. Remove your hand. The man removed his hand. Slowly. The way a man removed his hand when removing it was the only option that did not end badly for him. Caspian turned back to the table as though nothing of particular significance had occurred. Selene looked at the place on her arm where the Iron Fang beta's grip had been, then at Caspian's back, then at the assembled wolves watching her. She filed it. Later. She would process what it meant later. She found him that evening, when the delegation had retired and the fortress had settled into its night rhythms. He was in a corridor near the great hall, speaking quietly to his beta. He saw her coming and said something short to Lorcan, who departed without looking at Selene in a way that made it clear he was doing it on purpose. That was not your place, she said. In the hall. Caspian regarded her. I disagree. I did not ask you to intervene. No, he said. You didn't. Then. No one touches what enters Velthorn under my authority without my consent. He said it the same way he'd said it in the hall, without heat, without emphasis, simply a fact about the way things were. That isn't about you specifically. It would have been the same for anyone. Selene studied him. Would it? Something moved in his expression. Not quite amusement. Not quite agreement. You're going to be difficult, he said. I'm going to be accurate, she replied. There's a difference. He looked at her for a moment, really looked, the way he'd looked at her in the courtyard, with that silver-eyed stillness that made her feel precisely located, like a point on a map. Then he said, yes, there is. He turned to go. Why did you accept the arrangement? She asked. He stopped. Did not turn immediately. The corridor was lit by a single wall sconce, and the light made a study in contrast of him, warm gold on one side, deep shadow on the other. Because you needed to be inside these walls, he said, to the middle distance, not to her. More than you know. He walked away before she could ask what that meant. Her wolf pressed against her ribs. He knows something, she said, in the wordless language of certainty. Selene stood alone in the corridor. I know, she replied. She found it at 3 a.m. She had not slept. She had not expected to sleep. New territory, unfamiliar stone, the bond she was refusing to acknowledge still pulsing in her chest like a second heartbeat she hadn't asked for. Sleep was not possible. She had explored instead. Methodically, quietly, the way a healer catalogued an unfamiliar herb before touching it. She'd mapped the eastern corridors, the kitchens, the western ward. She'd noted 3 secondary exits, 2 wells, the location of what appeared to be a garrison. And then the archives. The door was unlocked, which was either an invitation or an oversight, and Selene did not wait to determine which. The archive room was long and low-ceilinged, the kind of room that had been built to hold things rather than to welcome people into them. Iron shelving along every wall. The smell of old parchment and resin and time. She moved to the oldest section. Her mother had said find the records. Records of what? She had never specified. Records were held in archives. This was the oldest part of the oldest fortress in the Northern Territories. She started at the earliest dates and worked forward. Birth records. Death records. Pack census rolls from 6 decades past. Alliance documents, trade agreements, border resolutions. She moved through them with the methodical efficiency of someone who had been taught to read medical logs, not absorbing every word but pattern scanning, looking for the thing that didn't fit the surrounding material. Her mother's name appeared in the 43rd year of the current dating system. Not in birth records. Not in death records. In exile records. Lyra of the Silver Summit Territory. Female. Age 19. Exiled by order of the Summit Council under Provision 7 of the Witness Silence Act, the sole purpose of which was preventing the spoken testimony of those who had. I wondered, said a voice behind her, when you would find that. She did not startle. She had heard him in the corridor 30 seconds before he spoke, the particular weight of his footfall, already becoming distinct to her in the way that mattered, in the way she didn't want it to matter. Caspian stood in the doorway with a lantern. The light fell across him in gold and shadow, the same contrasts as the corridor. He was looking at the record in her hands with an expression of perfect, controlled calm. The kind of calm that comes not from the absence of feeling, but from long practice containing it. You knew, Selene said. Not an accusation yet. A statement she was giving him room to confirm or complicate. Yes. She looked at the record. At her mother's name, 19 years old, exiled for the crime of seeing something she wasn't supposed to see. How long have you known? Since before you arrived, he said. Since before the arrangement. Selene set the record down on the shelf with great care. She turned to face him. Then you need to tell me everything, she said. Now. He held her gaze for a long moment. In the lantern light his eyes were less silver than she'd thought in daylight. Darker. Deeper. Yes, he said again. I do. Chapter 3. The truth has teeth. He set the lantern between them on the reading table and did not sit. Neither did she. Standing felt appropriate. What he was about to tell her was not the kind of information you received from a chair. Your mother witnessed a murder, Caspian said. The words fell into the archive silence the way a stone fell into still water. One point of contact, then the rings spreading outward into everything. Selene said nothing. She had learned long ago that silence invited more than questions did, and she needed him to tell her everything before she could decide what to do with it. 23 years ago, he continued, before I was Alpha, before my father was Alpha, my grandfather held Velthorn. And Dorian's father, male, held Iron Fang. He moved to the shelf and ran one finger along the spines of the records there, not pulling anything yet, the gesture of a man who knew exactly where everything was. There was a peace summit. 3 packs, neutral ground. Velthorn, Iron Fang, and the Silver Summit territory. He paused. Your mother's home pack. She wasn't from Ashvale, Selene said quietly. No, she was Silver Summit born. She came to the summit as a record keeper's apprentice. He did pull a record now older than the one Selene had been holding, its binding cracked and brown at the edges. He opened it, set it between them. Elder Torvin of the Silver Summit was the treaty witness, the senior arbiter. His signature would have made the agreement binding across all 3 territories. He tapped the page. Male did not want the treaty binding. He had already decided to absorb the Silver Summit by force, and a signed treaty would have made that action prosecutable before the Council of Elders. Selene looked at the page. At the treaty that bore 2 signatures, not 3. At the blank line where Elder Torvin's name should have been. Male killed him, she said. During the summit's second evening, in a private corridor, away from witnesses, Caspian closed the record. Away from everyone except a 19-year-old record keeper's apprentice who had stayed late to finish transcriptions. The archive pressed in around them. The smell of old parchment. The silence of records that had been holding their breath for 23 years. She saw it, Selene said. She saw it. And she told someone. She came to my grandfather. That night, terrified, alone, with no one else to trust. Something changed in Caspian's voice at this, a tightening, very brief, controlled immediately. He believed her. He wanted to take it to the council directly. But before he could, Male found out she'd spoken. The Summit Council, already half absorbed into Iron Fang's influence by that point, invoked the Witness Silence Act. An ancient provision that gave them the power to exile anyone whose testimony might, quote, destabilize territorial peace. They exiled her to protect a murderer. They exiled her to protect themselves. His voice was even. Just facts. Facts he had clearly turned over many times in private, in the dark. My grandfather could not prevent it without triggering the war he'd been trying to avoid. He gave her what he could sanctuary designation. She could not be harmed on Velthorn territory. She lived here for 3 years. He looked at Selene. You already know how that ended. The cedar oil scent of her mother's room. The smoothed quilt. The healer who had looked at the official record and said wasting illness with eyes that could not quite meet Selene's. Male sent someone, Selene said. After my grandfather died. His protection died with him. The new arrangements were less absolute. And my father. A pause. The longest pause yet. Your father knew she'd been exiled here, Caspian said carefully. Dorian, Male's son, who by then had taken Iron Fang, knew that Garen of Ashvale had been corresponding with her, had been planning to help her reach the council before the statute of limitations on territorial exile expired. He met her eyes. The lantern between them threw the same contrasts as every light had since she arrived, one side gold, one side shadow. Dorian offered Garen a choice. Iron Fang's protection and alliance, or Iron Fang's attention. Garen chose protection. The silence after that was different from the ones before it. Selene stood very still. Her father had known his mate was alive, in danger, carrying evidence that could bring down the most powerful pack in the Northern Territories, and he had told Dorian where she was. In exchange for 20 years of safety and trade routes. 20 years. How long have you known all of this? She asked. Her voice surprised her. It was steady. Since Dorian approached my pack about the alliance arrangement 3 months ago. He paused. Since I understood why he was specifically requesting you. Selene looked up. He thinks you have proof, Caspian said. Something your mother left you. He doesn't know what form it takes, but he's believed for years that Lyra had documentation, something she was carrying or had hidden, and when she died, he was never able to confirm it had been destroyed. His eyes moved briefly to the collar of her gown. He offered the alliance specifically to get you inside a territory he could monitor. He thought a political bride in an unfamiliar pack would have nowhere to go with whatever she carried. Selene's hand moved to the collar of her gown, felt the small weight beneath the fabric. The locket. The worn clasp. The nervous habit of a woman who had carried something important and could not speak it aloud. She had never opened it. She had worn it every day for 8 years, and she had never opened it. She had been too afraid. Too afraid of what she'd find. Too afraid of what she wouldn't. Her fingers closed around the outside of it now, through the fabric. "He's right," she said quietly. "She left me something." Caspian went very still. "I don't know what's inside it," Selene said. "I haven't," she stopped. "I wasn't ready." He said nothing. He did not press. He waited the way he had been waiting since she arrived. Patient in the particular way of someone who had decided something and was giving the other person the time they needed to reach the same place. She reached up and drew the locket out from beneath her collar. Silver. Small. The clasp worn to silk from 23 years of a woman's hands, opening and closing, keeping something safe inside her. Selene pressed the catch. The locket opened. Inside, folded to the smallest possible square, pressed flat by the weight of years. A piece of paper. So small. So folded. She drew it out with careful fingers, spread it on the table beside the lantern, coaxed each crease open without tearing. A name. One name, written in her mother's handwriting, in ink so old it had gone brown at the edges. Elder Vesh of the Western Summit. The last honest voice. He will remember me. Selene stared at it. 8 years she had carried this. 8 years, and it had always been one name. One direction. Go here. Find this person. Tell them what I saw. She looked up at Caspian. Do you know him? She asked. Elder Vesh. Something shifted in his face, not surprise, but something adjacent to it. Recognition. Yes, it said. That is the right answer. He is the only member of the Council of Elders Dorian has never been able to reach. The only one who has resisted Iron Fang's expansion consistently, publicly, without explaining why. He looked at the paper. He knew your mother. He was at the summit. He was a witness. No. He met her eyes. He arrived the morning after. After Torvin was dead, after your mother was already in exile proceedings. He was too late to stop it. His jaw tightened briefly. He's been waiting 23 years for someone to give him the grounds to finish what your mother started. The archive was silent around them. The lantern threw its light between them, steady, unhurried. Selene folded the paper back, pressed it into the locket, closed the clasp. Then we need to reach him, she said. Yes, Caspian said. We do. She looked up at him sharply. We. This isn't only your fight, he said. It was not an offer. Not a negotiation. It was the same kind of statement he made everything into a fact, established, not requiring debate. Dorian has been operating in Velthorn's territories under the cover of this alliance for 3 months. 2 of my border villages have had their trade routes redirected without my consent. He is already moving. His eyes found hers. Whatever I thought this arrangement was when I accepted it, I was wrong. I was being used, the same as you. I don't tolerate that. The briefest pause. Neither do I, she said. Something passed between them then. Not the bond, or not only the bond. Something older than the bond and less magical and more durable. The recognition of 2 people who had both been made pieces on a board and were simultaneously deciding they were done being played. He almost smiled. Not quite, but close. And then footsteps in the corridor outside. Fast. Urgent. Lorcan appeared in the doorway, his face tight. My lord. Riders. The outer gate is reporting Iron Fang advance horses. Caspian's expression closed like a door. Dorian, he said. 3 days early, Lorcan confirmed. He'll be at the gates by mid-morning. The archive. The lantern. the locket warm against Selene's skin. Caspian looked at her. "Whatever you were going to be when he arrives," he said, "be something else." She held his gaze. "I've been performing compliance since I was 15 years old," she said. "I know exactly what it looks like." He nodded once. Gone in the corridor before the lantern light had finished settling behind him. Selene stood alone in the archive, the locket in her fist, her wolf pressed hard against her ribs. "He knows the truth," she said. "I know. He's choosing our side." Selene looked at the records. At her mother's name in brown ink. At 23 years of a secret kept in a space smaller than a thumbnail. "Not our side," she said, tucking the locket back against her skin. "The right side. That's different." She blew out the lantern and went to prepare for Dorian's arrival. Chapter 4. The betrayal that changes everything. Dorian arrived like sunlight. That was the word that came to Selene's mind as she watched from the upper window, and she hated how accurate it was. He rode into Velthorn's courtyard on a pale horse with his delegation arranged behind him in perfect formation, and the morning fell across him in a way that seemed cooperative. His smile reached the far walls. His greeting to the gate guards was warm, specific, personal. He had learned their names, or had had someone learn them for him, which amounted to the same performance and different prep. She watched him dismount. Watched him look up at the fortress, with the eyes of a man appraising something he intended to own. This is what evil looks like, she thought, when it is very good at its work. Not monstrous. Not cold. Not the brittle cruelty of small men protecting small power. Dorian was genuinely, usefully warm. Charming in the deep sense, the sense that meant his attention felt like sunlight when it fell on you. It was the most dangerous kind of dangerous. The kind that moved through a room leaving everyone feeling better about themselves, so that when the consequence arrived, no one believed it could be him. She dressed carefully. Simple. Soft colors. She left her silver hair pinned and neat and wore the expression she had been refining since she was 15. Pleasantly present, mildly interested, the careful blankness of a woman who is a backdrop to someone else's story. She had hated wearing it in Ashvale. She had never imagined she might be grateful for it. She went to meet him. He was everything in person that he was from a distance, and worse. He embraced the performance of concern for her. Asked after her adjustment to Velthorn's climate, to the pack, to the new rhythms of her life. His eyes moved over her with apparent warmth, and underneath that warmth, quick and quiet and completely unhurried assessment. The same appraiser's eye she'd seen in his beta, more refined. She gave him nothing. She answered every question with the precise minimum of truth required to be unremarkable. She was well. The fortress was beautiful. The pack had been welcoming. She found Velthorn's library particularly fine. He had not come to see how she was. She already knew this. She was waiting for the moment he showed her why he had come. It arrived before midday, while Caspian was occupied with the formal meeting in the Great Hall, trade route discussions, border administration, the surface business of an alliance in good standing. Selene had been dismissed from the hall as irrelevant to the proceedings, which was both an insult she'd accepted and a tactical gift she'd immediately recognized. She was in the eastern corridor when she heard the footsteps behind her. Dorian's voice arrived at the same time as his hand light at her elbow, the grip of a man who had been managing women through proximity for decades. Selene. Warm. Fond. The voice of a concerned mentor. A moment. She turned. He was alone, which meant he had engineered this. His escort was elsewhere, which meant he had specifically arranged for it. She made her expression open, slightly uncertain. The backdrop expression. Of course, she said. They walked a few steps along the corridor. He stopped at a window that overlooked the inner courtyard, stood looking out at it with his hands clasped behind his back in the posture of a man sharing a quiet confidence. I want you to know, he said, how pleased I am with how you've settled. It speaks well of you. Velthorn is not an easy pack to navigate. Everyone has been very kind, she said. And Caspian? He said the name with a certain quality, neutral on the surface, testing underneath. He can be difficult to read. He has been fair. Dorian nodded. Looked out the window. A pause long enough to be deliberate. I was told, he said, conversationally, looking at the courtyard rather than her, that you've been spending time in the archive rooms. Selene's heartbeat stayed exactly even. I enjoy reading, she said. The collection is extensive. He nodded again. The nod of a man filing something. Velthorn does have an impressive historical record. He turned from the window then and looked at her, and for the first time the warmth dropped, just a fraction, just enough to show the thing beneath it, not cruelty, precisely. Something colder than cruelty. You know, he said, your mother was a remarkable woman. I say that sincerely. I knew her, briefly, when she lived here. The corridor. The window. The light falling across his face. Selene kept her expression soft and slightly confused, the expression of a woman who did not know what she knew. You knew her? A long time ago. He smiled. She was curious, much like you. A reader. A keeper of records. The smile remained perfectly in place. She had a particular quality. She noticed things. Retained things. A pause. Short. Surgical. Sometimes things that weren't meant to be noticed. He was looking at her with those warm, open eyes. Come, they said. Tell me what you found. Tell me what you know. I am safe. I am on your side. I am the answer. I'm afraid I didn't know her well, Selene said. She died when I was 15. Yes. The smile. A great loss. He turned back to the window. Your father sends his love, by the way. He misses you. The words landed flat, without weight, without the performance of warmth he had given everything else. And in their flatness, she heard the message. Your father is mine. Your protection is mine. Your silence is guaranteed by someone who will guarantee it whether you consent or not. He believed he had already won. He believed that the fact of her father's complicity was a leash, and that she loved her father enough to stay on it. Selene looked at the courtyard below the window, at the black stone of Velthorn's walls, at the wolves moving through the yard with that particular quality of belonging, people who lived in a place that was genuinely theirs. She thought about her father standing at the top of Ashbile's steps. Behave yourself. She thought about a locked door and a cedar smell and a woman who had been 19 years old and alone and frightened and had gone to a stranger with the truth anyway. She thought about a piece of paper the size of a thumbnail, folded tight against her heart for 8 years. She decided. Please send him my regards, she said pleasantly. Dorian smiled. Of course. She went to Caspian within the hour. Not to ask permission. Not to warn him. Not to negotiate. She told him what had been said in the corridor, without performance or omission. She watched his face as she spoke, and watched it do that thing it did, receive everything, show nothing on the surface, contain the underneath with the practiced efficiency of a man who had long since learned that the feelings could happen later, that right now there was work. He knows about the archive, Caspian said. One of his men told him. Someone in the fortress. Yes. His jaw was tight. Lorcan has been trying to identify which wolf for the past 3 weeks. Does it matter now? He looked at her. No. Then here is what matters. She spread the pieces out between them in the same methodical way she unpacked a healer's kit, each element placed precisely, each relationship to the others accounted for. Her mother's locket. The archive record. Caspian's knowledge of pack law. Elder Vesh. He has a gathering of every Northern Alpha in 3 days, she said. He scheduled it as a celebration. The alliance ceremony. He wants every witness present when he formally announces Velthorn's absorption into his network. She looked up. If we are going to do this, we do it there. In front of every witness he has gathered. We take the tool he built for his own triumph, and we use it for ours. Caspian was very still. You understand what that means, he said. It was not a question. Once we move in that room, there is no quiet resolution. There is no negotiation afterward. He will spend whatever he is left trying to bury us. He's already trying to bury us, Selene said. He's been trying to bury this since my mother was 19 years old. Her voice was steady. I'm done being patient with his timeline. The room was silent. Outside, the sounds of the fortress. Wolves moving through their days. The distant ring of steel in the training yard. A child's voice somewhere in the western corridor, answered by a warm adult laugh. A pack that was genuinely, wholly a home. Caspian looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "We need to get a message to Elder Vesh tonight." "Yes," she said. "And you need to be certain of one other thing." He spoke carefully. Not with hesitation. He did not do hesitation, but with the precision of a man saying something exact. "When we walk into that hall together, Dorian will know the alliance is finished. He will also know, everyone in that room will know what you are to me. The bond. The mark. The thing they had not named directly." She met his eyes. "I know. I need to know you're choosing that. Not being carried into it by what happened in the archive, by the anger, by Caspian." His name in her mouth. Direct. Undecorated. "I am not a woman who does things by accident." He went quiet. Then, slowly, something that had been held behind his eyes for 3 days shifted. Not softness exactly. Something more durable than softness. Certainty. "No," he said. "You're not." The meeting with Elder Vesh was arranged before midnight. A sealed message, a trusted Velthorn rider, a route that avoided every Iron Fang checkpoint. The response arrived with the dawn. Selene unfolded it. "Read it once." "I remember, Lyra. I have been waiting. Tell me when and where." She folded the paper. Pressed it against the locket through her gown. Outside her window, the sun was rising over Velthorn's black stone, pressing gold into every crevice of the ancient fortress. In 3 days, Dorian's hall. In 3 days, every witness he had gathered. In 3 days, it ended. Her wolf pressed forward against her ribs, not restless now. Ready. Chapter 5. The storm she became. The day before the gathering, Caspian found her in the healing wing. She had not been asked to assist there. She had simply appeared on the second morning of her stay, noted that the pack's primary healer, a compact, sharp-eyed woman named Deva, was managing 3 cases simultaneously with the particular expression of a person who needed another pair of hands, and picked up a compress and started working. Deva had watched her for 10 minutes in silence. Then she had moved over and made room at the table without comment. That had been a week ago. Since then, the healing wing had become Selene's anchor in the fortress, the place where she was herself, unmistakably, without performance or calculation. Where the work was what the work was, and the outcome was concrete and her hands knew what to do. Caspian stood in the doorway now, watching her roll bandages with the efficiency of long practice. He did not speak immediately. She had noticed that about him, he never arrived with noise. He entered spaces the way he entered rooms, absorbing them, letting them become his before he changed them. "How are you?" he asked. She glanced up. "Present tense or tomorrow tense?" "Both." She set the bandage roll down and looked at him properly. In the healing wing's daylight, without the drama of archive lanterns and crisis corridors, he looked not different. He looked like the same man. He simply looked like a man, for a moment, rather than an alpha. There were shadows under his eyes. "I'm well," she said. "You're not sleeping." "Occupational condition. There are herbs for that." The corner of his mouth moved. "I'll manage." She studied him. "You've held this alone for a long time," she said. "What you know. What you've been carrying about my mother, about Dorian. You've been carrying it alone." He looked at her steadily. "It wasn't mine to share." "That doesn't mean it wasn't heavy." He said nothing. But he didn't look away, and in his silence she heard the answer yes. Heavy. For long enough that he had forgotten the weight, because it had become simply the condition of standing upright. She understood that. She understood it very specifically. "After tomorrow," she said, "you won't have to." He crossed the room. Not to her, or not only to her. To the window beside her, where the mountain view spread out in its full winter severity, the peaks white, the dark forest below them, the sky the particular pale blue of cold that held. "I owe you something," he said. She waited. "When you first arrived," he said, "I knew what was in the locket. Not the name, not specifically. But I knew your mother had carried something. I should have told you immediately." His voice was even. Measured. The voice of a man accounting for himself without theater. "I didn't. I waited for you to find it yourself because I thought, a brief pause. I thought if I gave you the information, you would take it and leave. Go to Vesh alone, without the protection of Velthorn behind you. And Dorian would have you in the open before you reached him. Selene looked at him. You were protecting me, she said. I was, he said. And it wasn't my call to make. She was quiet for a moment. It kept me safe. It kept you in the dark. Those aren't the same thing. She looked back at the mountains. At the pale blue cold of the sky. No, she agreed. They're not. A beat. Don't do it again. No, he said. I won't. The simplicity of it. The absence of justification or bargaining. Her wolf settled in her chest. Not the urgent press. Not the roaring surge of that first moment in the courtyard. Something quieter than both of those things. The deep, cellular calm of a wolf who has found what she was moving toward and has stopped moving and is simply there. There, said her wolf. Selene looked at the man standing at the window beside her. At the shadows under his eyes from the sleepless week. At the hands braced against the windowsill, scarred, capable, the hands of an alpha who had built and held and defended a home. At the line of his jaw. At the place where his neck met his shoulder. At the way he was looking at the mountains. Not surveying them. Not measuring them. Just looking at them the way a man looked at something he had loved for a long time. Caspian, she said quietly. He turned. She crossed the small distance between them and stood before him, close, and looked up at him with her eyes open and her wolf still and her decision made. I want you to mark me, she said. Tonight. Before the gathering. His breath changed. Not because of the hall, she continued. Not as a tactic. Because I'm choosing it. Because the moon put you in my direction, and I am done wasting time being afraid of things I'm not actually afraid of. He looked at her for a long moment, searching her face, reading it the way he read everything, completely and without hurry. Then he raised one hand and curved it against her jaw. His thumb traced the line of her cheekbone. I've wanted to do this, he said, since you lied to me in the courtyard. She let out a breath that was almost a laugh. About not feeling it. About not feeling it. She leaned into his hand. The contact, simple, complete, moved through the bond like a cord resolving. I was afraid, she said. I had reasons. I know your reasons, he said. I read your face. I always read your face. I know. It did not bother her anymore. You're the first person I've known for whom that isn't a violation. He looked at her with those deep silver eyes. Your mother was brave, he said. She carried an impossible thing alone for 3 years and she didn't bend. His thumb did not stop its movement. You're braver. You've been carrying it for 8. She felt it move through her, not the bond, not this time. Something more human than the bond. The thing that came from being genuinely, specifically seen. Not as a daughter with a dead mother's mission. Not as a packless offering. Not as a political bride. As herself. I need to ask you something first, she said. Ask. The man you mentioned. The previous loss. She had not asked directly until now. When you told me 10 years ago, someone the moon chose and she died. She held his gaze. Is that why you have walls? He was quiet for a long moment. Her name was Mara, he said finally. She was 19. There was an attack on the border. I was away. I was dealing with a territorial dispute 3 days' ride from here, and by the time I got back, he stopped. Resettled. I told myself afterward that if I had claimed her when I should have, when I felt the bond and knew what it was, she would have had the protection of the alpha mark. She would have been harder to reach. A pause. I also know that's not necessarily true. But knowing and believing are different. Selene pressed her hand over his on her jaw. This is different, she said. Yes, he said. It is. She tilted her head. Tonight, she said. After we've sent word to Vesh. Before the morning. Tonight, he agreed. It happened under the moon. No ceremony. No pack gathered. No priestess, no staff, no ancient words intoned for an audience. Just the two of them on the fortress rampart, the winter sky overhead absurdly full of stars, the mountains dark and enormous around them, the cold air holding its breath. His hands at her face. Her hands at his chest. The bond between them. The thing that had been building since the courtyard, since the archive, since the healing wing and the window, and every careful, honest conversation between them, present in the air like something that had been waiting for exactly this. "Ready?" he murmured. She turned her head, giving him access to her neck, to the place where the mark would settle. "I've been ready," she said, since the cart came down the ridge. His laugh, low and brief and genuine, was the last thing she heard before his teeth found the mark place at the junction of her neck and shoulder, and the world went white. Not pain. Not this time. Nothing like pain. Light and warmth, and the tremendous, sudden completeness of a connection that had been approaching for weeks, snapping finally and fully into place. She felt him, his emotions flooding through the bond in a wave he wasn't trying to contain. Fierce protectiveness, something vast and glad, the private and overwhelming relief of a man who had kept his walls up for 10 years and had finally, consciously, deliberately brought them down. She let her own emotions flow back. Gratitude. Trust. The particular love that came from being known, not performed for. And underneath it all, the bone-deep determination of a woman who had been a backdrop for the last time. When he raised his head, his mark glowed silver against her skin. She reached up and touched it. Then she looked at him with clear, steady eyes. "Tomorrow," she said. "Tomorrow," he agreed. The moon watched. She had been waiting 23 years for this particular night. Chapter 6. What was always coming. The great hall of Dorian's borrowed staging ground, a neutral fortress he had rented for the gathering, was dressed in iron fawn colors. Black and gold banners hung from rafters high enough to lose in shadow. Every alpha, every beta, every elder of consequence from the 5 northern territories had been assembled as Dorian had planned them. Witnesses to his triumph, an audience for the announcement that would formalize Ironfang's position as the dominant power in the northern territories for a generation. He stood at the head of the hall with a goblet in his hand, warm smile deployed at full wattage, and gave the speech she had predicted word for word. 3 years of work. A unified alliance. A foundation stone. Bound by blood and vow. She stood in the entrance and let him finish. Then she stepped forward. The door's opening had not been subtle. The silence that followed was not the silence of confusion. These were alphas, betas, elders, wolves who read rooms for a living. They felt the shift the moment it happened, felt the recalibration of power in the room, felt Caspian's presence behind her the way wolves always felt a Velthorn alpha's presence. But they felt hers too. The bond had changed something. Not externally, not visibly in ways she could name. But she felt it in her spine, in the way she moved across the stone floor. Something settled. Something no longer performing or containing, simply present. She was finished being the backdrop. She let the silence hold for a moment. Let the room understand what it was looking at. Dorian's smile had not moved. He was too good for that. But his hand, wrapped around the goblet, tightened. She saw it. "I was delivered to Velthorn as a political bride," she said, and her voice carried without effort, without performance, into every corner of the listening hall. "I was sold by my father. Packaged by you." She found Dorian's eyes. Held them. "You both believed that a woman with no pack, no rank, and no options had no recourse." She paused. "Let it breathe. You were wrong about the options." A murmur moved through the hall. Alphas leaning to betas. Betas leaning to elders. Dorian set his goblet down. "My dear," he said, warmly, the warm voice, the voice that sounded like reason and felt like sunlight, "this is a celebration. Whatever concerns you have, I'm certain we can." 23 years ago, she said, "your father murdered Elder Torvin of the Silver Summit territory." The murmur became silence. Real silence. The silence of a room in which something irrevocable has just been said aloud. He was killed during the Northern Peace Summit, in a private corridor, to prevent his signature from binding a treaty that would have protected the Silver Summit from absorption. She walked forward. There was one witness. A 19-year-old record-keeper's apprentice named Lyra, who reported it to the Velthorn Alpha of that time and was exiled under the Witness Silence Act before she could testify. She stopped in the center of the room. That woman was my mother. She carried the documentation for 23 years. She gave it to me. She opened the locket, drew out the folded paper, set it on the nearest table, visible, present, unambiguous. One name, written in ink gone brown with age. Elder Vesh of the Western Summit. Dorian's eyes went to it. A name on a piece of paper, he said, and to his credit, genuine credit, he was remarkable. His voice was still steady, still warm. I understand your grief. I understand. Elder Vesh, said a voice from the back of the hall. The crowd parted. The old wolf walked through it slowly, unhurried, with the particular authority of a man who had been waiting a very long time and had finally arrived at the moment that required him. He was older than Selene had imagined from her mother's description. Older than a photograph would have suggested. But his eyes were clear and steady, and when they found Selene's face, they held a recognition that moved through her like current. I was at the summit, Vesh said, to the hall, to the assembled alphas and betas and elders who had gathered to witness Iron Fang's triumph. I arrived the morning after Torvin was found dead. I was told it was a rogue attack. I was told the witness had been exiled for destabilization. He stopped beside the table, looked at the folded paper, looked at Selene. I have spent 23 years looking for Lyra's documentation. I have spent 23 years waiting for the grounds to reopen this case before the full council. He looked at the paper again. I have them now. Dorian moved. Not dramatically. He simply straightened, set his hands flat on the table before him, and looked at the room with a smile that was finally, genuinely, fully empty. Whatever historical claim, the Witness Silence Act has a 25-year expiration. Caspian's voice. Behind Selene. Steady, low, carrying easily. You have 2 years remaining before the exile record against Lyra of the Silver Summit closes permanently. Under territorial law, any documentation produced before that expiration is admissible before the full council. He moved forward until he stood beside Selene. Not in front. Beside. I have the archive records. Selene has the primary documentation. Elder Vesh has 23 years of corroborating observation. He looked at Dorian across the hall. The council convenes in 6 days. We'll see you there. The silence in the hall was the silence of 20 alphas doing simultaneous calculations, of 20 betas reevaluating everything they thought they understood about the northern balance of power, of 3 elders recognizing that they were present at a moment history would not ignore. Dorian looked at Selene. For the first time, she saw it, the thing behind all the warmth, all the performance, all the managed impressions. Fear. Small. Contained. But real. You should have stayed quiet, he said, quietly. Just for her. No performance left. She thought of her mother. 19 years old. Alone. Frightened. Going to a stranger with the truth anyway. My mother should have stayed quiet, she said. She chose differently. I'm her daughter. She held his gaze until he was the one who looked away. He left with his delegation before the hall had fully absorbed what had happened. No arrest, not yet. The council would convene. The documentation would be formally presented. The process would take the time it took. But the room had understood. The room had witnessed. The 30 wolves in that hall would leave and speak to 30 more, and those 30 to 30 more, and the story would move through the northern territories the way all important stories moved, by word and repetition, by the particular weight of truth that has been held back for too long and cannot stop once it begins. Selene stood in the center of the hall long after Dorian's horses left the outer yard. Wolves approached her. Carefully. Respectfully. Alphas who had questions. Elders who had watched Vesh read the paper and needed to understand the implications. The beta of the Silver Summit territory, young, clearly moved, barely keeping his composure, who took her hands and said his pack had known for 20 years that something had been buried and had never been able to name what. She answered every question. She thanked every wolf who offered acknowledgement. She kept her voice steady and her back straight and her expression measured. When the last wolf had finally moved away and the hall was almost empty and her legs had been standing on stone for 2 hours, Caspian found her. He stood behind her without speaking. She felt him. Through the bond. His particular quality of presence, the depth of it, the steadiness. It's over, she said. The first part of it, he said. The council will take time. I know. I mean, she stopped. Tried again. The part where I've been carrying it. That part is over. He said nothing. He moved to stand beside her. They stood together in the emptying hall, in the quiet after something enormous. After a moment, she looked at him. What happens now? She asked. He considered it. The council convenes. Dorian answers for his father's crimes and his own. The Silver Summit gets justice 23 years late, which is imperfect but not nothing. He paused. Ironfang's alliance structure collapses. 3 smaller packs have already sent writers to Velthorn this week requesting independent discussion. And us. The word us arrived in the air between them without self-consciousness. It was simply accurate. He turned to look at her. I would like, he said, with the careful precision he gave everything he meant fully, to take you home. To Velthorn. Where the pack is yours and the archive is yours and the healing wing is yours and whatever comes next, we face it from the mountain. Her wolf was still in her chest. Not the restless urgency. Not the roaring surge. Just the deep, cellular calm of a wolf who has found the place she was always moving toward. Yes, she said. Simple. Undecorated. Yes. Epilogue. Spring came to Velthorn like a question answered. The snow retreated up the mountain slopes by degrees, uncovering the dark soil beneath, and the dark soil uncovered small green things, insistent and unhurried, the way life was always insistent and unhurried when it had decided to return. Selene stood at the window of the healing wing, watching the first crocuses come up in the inner courtyard. Behind her, Deva was running through a supply inventory in a voice pitched for maximum efficiency and minimum sentiment, which was exactly how Deva ran through everything, which was exactly why the healing wing functioned as well as it did. Wolf root, 3 measures. Good. Red cedar bark, 1 measure. Low. Northern willow moss, 2 measures. Deva paused. You're not writing. I'm memorizing, Selene said. You always say that, and it's always somehow accurate. The sound of a record book closing. How do you do that? My mother taught me. Selene turned from the window. She could hold an entire herb index in her head without writing it down. Said paper could be taken, but no one could reach inside your skull. Deva looked at her with the expression she sometimes wore, the expression that meant she wanted to say something and was deciding whether it was her place. Go ahead, Selene said. She would have liked this place, Deva said. I think. Selene looked around the healing wing. At the well-stocked shelves. At the neat rows of compressed cloth. At the window with the mountain view. At the small table in the corner where 2 of the pack's young wolves had been learning herb classifications for the past month, leaving behind them, as always, a slight chaos of scattered notes. Yes, she said. She would. The council had convened 14 days after the gathering. The proceedings had lasted 6. Selene had testified on 3 of those 6 days, presenting the archive records, the locket documentation, the testimony of Elder Vesh. Caspian had presented Velthorn's historical records and the pack law analysis. Vesh had testified about the summit, about Torvin, about 23 years of watching Ironfang expand under the cover of a murder that could not be spoken. Dorian had engaged his legal advisors and performed his performance. It had not been enough. The full council had 18 members. 15 had voted for formal indictment and the reversal of Lyra's exile record, which, as it was pointed out by the tribunal elder, meant that Selene's mother had died in possession of full territorial rights she had been illegally stripped of, which in turn meant her daughter carried those rights by inheritance. The Silver Summit territory, formally absorbed by Ironfang 8 years earlier, was granted independence and reconstruction support. Dorian's alliance structure had been declared void. 3 smaller packs had allied with Velthorn within a month of the council's ruling. The pack at Selene's back now numbered twice what it had when she'd arrived. The trade routes that had been quietly redirected returned to their original paths. The border villages that had been under Ironfang's informal thumb sent representatives to Velthorn with what amounted to an apology and a request for partnership. The power vacuum had been significant. The filling of it had been less dramatic than Selene had imagined and more administrative than she had been prepared for. "You look like you are thinking about territorial law," said Caspian from the doorway. She turned. He was leaning against the doorframe with the look that had started to appear more regularly over the past months, not quite a smile, but everything adjacent to one. The look of a man who had rebuilt the habit of being content and found it fit better than he remembered. "I'm thinking about wolf rootstock," she said. "That's somehow worse." She crossed the room to him. He extended his arm without being asked, and she stepped into it, and his arm closed around her, and the bond settled now, deep and steady rather than urgent. The difference between a river and a flood moved warmly between them. "How is Lorcan?" she asked. Suspicious that the new Silver Summit representative is too good-looking to be only interested in trade agreements. "He's not wrong to be suspicious." "No," Caspian agreed. "But his judgment is impeccable in every other respect. He'll manage." She leaned into his side and looked at the courtyard through the window. At the crocuses. At the pack wolves moving through the spring morning, the ordinary rhythms of a home that was genuinely a home. Pups chasing each other past the well, an elder sitting with her face turned up to the early sun, two warriors running drills in the far corner with the unhurried focus of people who trained because they were proud of what they defended. She had earned her place in this. Not because Caspian loved her, though he did. Not because the moon had chosen her, though she had. But because she had walked into Velthorn with nothing and had offered what she was. Her knowledge, her hands, her grief, her determination, and the pack had looked at what she brought and called it enough. More than enough. Her wolf pressed warmly in her chest. "There's something I need to tell you," Selene said. She felt him still beside her. Not with alarm, he had learned her voice well enough to hear the quality in it, the particular warmth. She took his hand and placed it flat against her stomach. His hand stilled. He was quiet for a very long moment. Then, "How long?" Deva confirmed this morning. 8 weeks, she thinks. Maybe 9. Another silence. She felt it move through the bond, the enormity of it, the careful joy of a man who had lost things and had therefore learned to receive good things slowly, making sure they were real. She waited. "One?" he asked, very quietly. "One." She felt his exhale against her temple. Slow. Full. The breath of a man releasing something he had been carrying for 10 years without knowing the name of it. His arms came around her from behind, encircling her completely, his hands overlapping across her stomach, his chin resting against the top of her head. "Your mother would have been here for this," he said, quiet and honest and direct, the way he always was. "I'm sorry she isn't." Selene's eyes stung. "She got me here," she said. "That's not nothing." The spring morning moved through the window. The crocuses in the courtyard lifted their small faces toward the warmth. "She fought for you before you were old enough to fight for yourself," Caspian said. "And you finished what she started." He pressed his lips to her hair. "Whatever comes next, it comes into a different world than the one she left." Selene pressed her hands over his. "A better one," she said. The mountain rose behind the fortress, vast and old, indifferent to the particular and irreplaceable miracle happening in a healing wing window on its slope. The moon, somewhere in the daylight sky where she was always present whether visible or not, offered no announcement. She had known how this ended from the beginning. She always did.